Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books in Bytes. This time we're diving deep into Mencius,
Oh, yeah.
that fascinating Confucian philosopher from ancient China. You know, his work is surprisingly relevant even today. We're going to take you on a journey through the whole book,
Okay, yeah.
focusing on the core text itself, skipping over any extra commentary or footnotes.
Sounds good. It's a real treasure trove of wisdom, full of insights into human nature and leadership and the pursuit of a just society. Mencius had some pretty revolutionary ideas for his time, and they still resonate with us centuries later.
So before we jump in,
Yeah.
let's give our listener a little roadmap of where we're headed. What are some of the big themes we'll be exploring?
Well, one of the central ideas is that human nature is inherently good.
Yeah.
Mencius believed everyone is born with these seeds of virtue. He calls them sprouts that have the potential to grow into full-fledged moral character.
Okay, so we're all born with this potential for goodness. What else?
From that foundation, Mencius builds a whole philosophy around how we nurture those sprouts, both individually and as a society. He talks a lot about benevolent leadership, arguing that a ruler's primary duty is to care for the people and cultivate their virtue.
And this wasn't just some abstract theory for him, right? He actually went out and tried to convince rulers to adopt his ideas.
Oh, absolutely. He traveled from state to state, engaging in these lively debates with kings and officials, trying to persuade them to embrace his vision of a just and harmonious society. It's quite a story.
I can't wait to hear more about those conversations.
Yeah.
But first, let's set the stage a bit. Mencius lived during a pretty chaotic time in Chinese history, right?
Yes, this was the Warring States period, a time of constant conflict and upheaval. Imagine rival kingdoms battling for power, shifting alliances, and a whole lot of uncertainty about the future. It was against this backdrop that Mencius developed his philosophy.
So in a way, his ideas were a response to the turmoil of his time. He was searching for a way to bring peace and stability back to society.
Exactly. And he believed the key lay in rediscovering those innate seeds of virtue within each of us and creating a system of governance that nurtured their growth.
Okay, let's unpack that, starting right at the beginning of the book.
Huh.
What are some of the first things Mencius talks about?
Well, he jumps right into this idea of human nature being fundamentally good. He argues that we're not born as blank slates. We come pre-wired with these sprouts of compassion, righteousness, and a sense of right and wrong.
You know, it's interesting because that goes against the grain of some other philosophies
Yeah.
that say we're inherently selfish or driven by base desires.
Right. Mencius takes a different approach. He points to our natural empathy, the way we instinctively recoil from seeing someone suffering. He argues that this isn't something we learn, it's part of who we are at our core.
And he uses some pretty vivid imagery to illustrate this point, right? I remember that passage about the child about to fall into a well.
Yes. It's one of the most famous passages in the book. He describes how anyone seeing this child teetering on the edge would feel a surge of alarm and compassion, a natural desire to help. Mencius argues that this instinctive reaction is proof of our innate goodness.
It's such a powerful image, and it really gets you thinking, if we all have this capacity for compassion within us, then why is there so much conflict and suffering in the world?
Well, Mencius would say it's because we often neglect or even suppress those innate sprouts of virtue. Just like a plant needs the right conditions to flourish, our moral character needs to be nurtured and cultivated, and that's where education, self-reflection, and good governance come in.
Okay, so let's delve into those ideas a little further. How does Mencius envision a society that truly cultivates virtue in its people?
He argues that it starts with leadership. Mencius believed that a ruler's actions have a profound impact on the moral climate of the whole society. A benevolent ruler, one who embodies those virtues of compassion, righteousness, and justice, can inspire the same in others.
So about leading by example.
Exactly. He famously said, "The people are the most important element in a nation. The spirits of the land and grain are next. The sovereign is the least." It's a pretty radical statement for his time.
He's basically saying that a ruler's job isn't to lord over the people, but to serve them.
Right, and that this service involves actively cultivating their well-being, both materially and morally. He advocated for things like fair land distribution, reducing taxes, and prioritizing education, all aimed at creating conditions where people could thrive and develop their potential.
You mentioned earlier that Mencius traveled around trying to persuade rulers to adopt his ideas. What were those conversations like?
Well, the book is full of these fascinating dialogues between Mencius and various rulers. He wasn't afraid to challenge them, to push back against their assumptions, and to point out the flaws in their thinking.
I bet some of those rulers weren't too happy to hear that their priorities were out of whack.
You can imagine. But Mencius was incredibly skilled at using logic, historical examples, and even a touch of humor to make his points. He would often draw on stories and analogies to illustrate his ideas in a way that was both compelling and memorable.
Do you have any favorite examples of these encounters?
Well, there's that famous story about King Xuan of Qi, who, seeing an ox being led to slaughter, felt so much compassion for the terrified animal that he ordered it to be spared and replaced with a sheep. Mencius uses this seemingly small act to illustrate the king's innate capacity for compassion, encouraging him to extend that same feeling towards his people.
It's a beautiful story, and it really highlights that idea of the sprouts being present, even in someone who might not seem particularly virtuous on the surface.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we all have the potential for goodness within us, and sometimes it just takes the right kind of nudge, the right kind of inspiration to bring it to the surface.
Okay, we've talked about human nature and benevolent leadership. What else stands out as a key theme in this first part of the book?
One thing that really comes through is Mencius's emphasis on the importance of self-cultivation. He believed that while our nature is inherently good, it's not something we can just take for granted. We have a responsibility to nurture those seeds of virtue within us, to actively cultivate our moral character through education, reflection, and right action.
It's like we have this amazing garden within us, but it takes effort to tend to it and help it flourish.
I love that analogy. And Mencius would agree. He believed that this process of self-cultivation was a lifelong journey, a constant striving to become the best versions of ourselves.
And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
We'll explore those practical steps Mencius outlines for cultivating our inner potential and living a life aligned with virtue. So you're eager to learn how to cultivate that inner garden of virtue. Mencius offers some fascinating insights into this process.
Absolutely. It feels like we've laid the groundwork, understanding those seeds of goodness within us. Now, how do we help them grow?
Well, Mencius believed that self-cultivation begins with self-reflection. He encourages us to look inward, to examine our thoughts and actions, and ask ourselves, am I living in accordance with my true nature?
It's like taking stock of our internal landscape. Are we nurturing those sprouts or letting them wither?
Exactly. And Mencius argues that this introspection isn't about beating ourselves up over our shortcomings. It's about understanding our motivations and making conscious choices that align with virtue.
So it's about recognizing those times when we might be acting out of selfishness or giving into those baser impulses we all have.
Right. And then making a deliberate effort to choose the path of righteousness, even when it's difficult.
Okay, self-reflection. What other practical steps does Mencius recommend for this self-cultivation journey?
He places a lot of emphasis on education, but not just any kind of education. He believed that studying the classics, learning from history, and engaging in thoughtful discussions with wise people were essential for developing moral character.
So it's about feeding our minds with wisdom and virtue, kind of like giving our sprouts the best possible fertilizer.
I like that. And Mencius believed that this kind of education wasn't just for the elite. He argued that everyone should have access to learning, and that it was a ruler's responsibility to provide opportunities for their people to grow intellectually and morally.
That makes sense. If you want a virtuous society, you need to cultivate virtue in all its members.
Precisely. And this education wasn't just about accumulating knowledge. It was about developing a deep understanding of human nature and learning to apply those principles of righteousness in our daily lives.
Mencius had a term for the ideal person who embodies these qualities right, the gentleman.
Yes. And for Mencius, a true gentleman wasn't defined by wealth or social status. It was all about character. A gentleman was someone who lived in accordance with virtue, who treated others with respect and compassion, and who used their wisdom to serve the community.
It's like that saying, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching.
That captures it perfectly. And for Mencius, this integrity wasn't just some abstract ideal. It was the foundation for a just and harmonious society. He believed that when individuals strive to become gentlemen, they create a ripple effect that uplifts everyone around them.
So it's not just about individual enlightenment. It's about contributing to the well-being of the whole community.
Exactly. And Mencius believed this was true not just for ordinary citizens, but for rulers as well. He argued that the best leaders are those who model these virtues of a gentleman, who govern with compassion and righteousness, and who prioritize the needs of the people above their own self-interest.
You know, it's striking how Mencius connects personal virtue with good governance. He really saw those two things as inseparable.
Absolutely. He believed that a ruler who lacked virtue would inevitably create a corrupt and unjust system, while a virtuous ruler would inspire and uplift the people.
So it's not enough for a leader to just issue decrees and enforce laws.
Yeah.
They need to embody those virtues they expect from others.
Right. He even goes so far as to say that if a ruler genuinely loves others and does good things for them, people will naturally be drawn to follow them. It's that whole idea of leading by example.
That resonates with us even today, as we often see that the most effective leaders are those who inspire through their actions and character, not just their position.
Now, while Mencius championed the inherent goodness of humanity and believed in our capacity for self-cultivation, he also acknowledged that we're not perfect. We all face challenges and temptations that can lead us astray.
So how do we navigate those tricky situations where we might be tempted to compromise our values?
Well, Mencius offers some guidance on that as well. He talks about the importance of cultivating what he calls yi, which is often translated as righteousness or rightness.
Yi. What exactly did he mean by that?
It's not just about following rules or blindly obeying authority. It's about having a strong moral compass and using it to guide your actions, even when faced with pressure or temptation to do otherwise.
It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard, even when it might cost us something.
Exactly. It's about having the courage to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's unpopular. And Mencius believed that this kind of moral courage was essential for both personal and societal well-being.
So how do we develop this yi, this inner compass that guides us towards righteous action?
Mencius believed it was a combination of nature and nurture. He argued that everyone is born with a sense of right and wrong, but it needs to be cultivated through education, self-reflection, and conscious practice.
It's like we have this innate sense of direction, but we need to learn how to read the map and navigate the terrain.
I love that analogy. And just as a compass can get thrown off course by magnetic interference, our own moral compass can be swayed by external pressures, societal norms, or even our own desires.
So it's about being aware of those potential distractions and making a conscious effort to stay true to our values.
Exactly. And Mencius provides some practical advice on how to do that. He talks about the importance of surrounding ourselves with good influences, seeking out wise counsel, and studying the examples of virtuous people from history.
It's like building a support system for our moral development.
That's a great way to put it. And just as we might rely on a friend or mentor for guidance in other areas of our lives, we can turn to those who embody virtue to help us stay on the right path.
So self-cultivation is a journey, not a destination. It's about constantly striving to become better, to align our actions with our values, and to make choices that contribute to a more just and harmonious world.
Beautifully said. And Mencius believed that this journey wasn't just about personal fulfillment, it was about fulfilling our potential as human beings and making a positive impact on the world around us.
This all makes so much sense. But I have to admit, it sounds like a lot of work. Is there any room for joy and fun in this whole self-cultivation process?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, Mencius believed that true joy and fulfillment come from living in accordance with virtue. He even said, "The great man is he who does not lose his child's heart."
What did he mean by that?
He was talking about that sense of wonder, curiosity, and openness that children often have. The ability to see the world with fresh eyes and approach life with a sense of joy and enthusiasm.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's about retaining that sense of playfulness and delight, even as we mature and face the complexities of life.
Exactly. It's about not becoming jaded or cynical, but holding on to that belief in our own goodness and the goodness of the world.
So self-cultivation isn't about becoming some kind of stoic sage who's detached from life's pleasures. It's about embracing life fully with a sense of joy and purpose.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And Mencius believed that this joy wasn't just a byproduct of virtue, it was an essential part of it. He saw a connection between moral goodness and genuine happiness.
So it's not a trade-off between doing the right thing and enjoying life. They actually go hand in hand.
Precisely. And this idea of finding joy in virtue is something that continues to resonate with people across cultures and throughout history.
It's a reminder that living a good life isn't about denying ourselves pleasure or following a rigid set of rules. It's about finding fulfillment and aligning our actions with our values and experiencing the joy that comes from making a positive difference in the world.
Now, while Mencius emphasized the importance of individual self-cultivation, he didn't stop there. He also had a lot to say about the kind of societal structures and systems that support the development of virtue.
So it's not just about individual effort. The environment we live in also plays a role.
Absolutely. Mencius believed that a truly just and harmonious society requires more than just virtuous individuals. It needs a system of governance that prioritizes the well-being of all its members. A system that promotes fairness, justice, and opportunity for everyone.
And this is where his ideas about benevolent leadership and the mandate of heaven come into play, right?
Exactly. We'll explore those concepts in more detail in the next part of our deep dive and see how Mencius envisioned a society that truly nurtured the goodness within each of us.
So we've talked about cultivating virtue within ourselves. But now I'm really curious to hear more about Mencius's vision for a society that supports this kind of growth.
Well, he believed that a just and harmonious society is built on a foundation of righteous governance.
Righteous governance. What exactly did he mean by that?
For Mencius, it wasn't just about having laws and enforcing them. It was about creating a system where the well-being of the people was truly prioritized.
So it's not just about maintaining order, but about actively promoting the welfare of everyone in society.
Exactly. He believed that a ruler had a moral obligation to care for the people, not just protect them from harm.
And this care went beyond just providing for basic needs like food and shelter, right?
Absolutely. Mencius argued that a righteous ruler should also create conditions that allow people to flourish morally and spiritually.
He uses this fascinating phrase, flood-like key, to describe a kind of moral energy that pervades a well-governed state.
Yes, it's a powerful metaphor. Imagine a society where virtue flows freely like water nourishing the land. That's what Mencius envisioned, a society where righteousness, compassion, and respect permeate every aspect of life.
So it's not just about laws and regulations, it's about creating a culture where virtue is valued and practiced.
Precisely. And Mencius believed that this kind of culture starts at the top, with the ruler setting an example for everyone else.
It all comes back to that idea of leading by example, doesn't it?
Right. He believed that a virtuous ruler would inspire virtue in the people, creating a virtuous cycle that benefits everyone.
Now, we talked earlier about the mandate of heaven. How does that fit into Mencius's idea of righteous governance?
The mandate of heaven was this ancient Chinese belief that a ruler's authority ultimately came from a higher power, from heaven itself.
So it's not just about lineage or military might. A ruler needs to be worthy of this mandate to truly have legitimacy.
Exactly. And Mencius argued that this worthiness was directly tied to the ruler's virtue and their commitment to the well-being of the people.
So if a ruler becomes tyrannical or neglects the needs of the people, they risk losing the mandate of heaven.
Exactly. Mencius believed that the mandate of heaven wasn't unconditional. It was a conditional grant of authority, dependent on the ruler fulfilling their moral obligations.
This adds a whole other layer of accountability, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just about staying in power. It's about governing justly and earning the right to rule.
Right. And Mencius used this concept to challenge rulers who were abusing their power or neglecting their responsibilities. He argued that they were not only failing their people, but also risking their own legitimacy.
It's a powerful idea that still resonates today as we continue to grapple with questions of good governance and the responsibilities of those in power.
Now, beyond this idea of righteous governance, Mencius also had some concrete ideas about how to create a society that supports the flourishing of its people.
I'm particularly interested in his economic ideas. We touched on them briefly earlier, but I'd love to hear more.
Mencius believed in a system that provided a safety net for the most vulnerable members of society. He argued that everyone should have access to basic necessities like food, shelter, and education.
That sounds pretty progressive for a philosopher from ancient China.
He was definitely ahead of his time. He saw poverty and deprivation as obstacles to moral development, arguing that if people are struggling to survive, they won't have the time or energy to cultivate virtue.
So it's not just about charity. It's about creating a system that enables everyone to reach their full potential.
Exactly. And he proposed some specific policies aimed at achieving this economic justice.
Like what?
Well, one of his key ideas was a system of land distribution that ensured everyone had enough land to support themselves and their families. He believed that this would provide economic stability and foster a sense of community.
He also advocated for something called the well-field system, right?
Yes. Imagine a community garden where everyone benefits from the shared labor, but also has the freedom to cultivate their own plot. That was the essence of the well-field system.
So it was a blend of private and public ownership, designed to promote both individual prosperity and collective well-being.
Precisely. And the produce from the central shared plot would be used to support public services like education and infrastructure.
It's fascinating how Mencius tried to balance individual initiative with a sense of shared responsibility.
He also believed in regulating commerce and taxation in a way that was fair and didn't overburden the people. He was against excessive taxation and monopolies, which he saw as stifling economic growth and creating resentment.
So it's not just about ensuring people have enough to survive. It's about creating a system where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Exactly. And he believed that this kind of economic justice was essential for creating a harmonious and virtuous society.
This is also relevant to the conversations we're having today about inequality and social justice.
Mencius's ideas offer a timeless framework for thinking about these issues. He reminds us that true prosperity isn't just about material wealth. It's about creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to develop their full potential, both materially and morally.
It's been an incredible journey exploring the world of Mencius. His ideas are so rich and thought-provoking. What's one final takeaway you'd like to leave our listener with?
Mencius believed that even small acts of kindness and virtue can have a ripple effect, creating a more just and harmonious world. So as you navigate your own life, remember those seeds of goodness within you and choose to nurture them. Who knows what positive impact you might have?
That's a beautiful thought to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the wisdom of Mencius.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you and our listener.